So let me ask you a question. How many of you have ever had a problem in relationships? Never. It's always bliss, isn't it? Well, today we're going to look at a couple of people in the book of Genesis who had an issue, who had some problems in relationships. And I want to tell you about a group of people in this church who could have had a relationship issue, but they decided to follow God. And then we're going to give you a really exciting update. As many of you know, we've been in a bit of a season of waiting in this church. Waiting on what was God going to do with Third Step. Waiting on what was God going to do about worship. Some of the staff things that we've been trying to do. And if you're like me, it's not a particularly great place to be. I wouldn't say, praise Jesus. It's amazing to be in a season of waiting. I came across a blog post from a pastor this week that talks about waiting. And I read it to the leadership team this week, and it just reminded, it was actually, I was doing, what's that? What is happening? It's like, I was reading about the life of Jacob, who we're going to talk about today. And this is what the author says. He says that the vast majority of Jacob's story was marked by extended periods of waiting on God. Brief bursts of divine activity were separated by vast expanses of virtual inactivity. Actually, this is one of God's signature ways. He separates his most outstanding works by protracted periods of seeming silence. Then when he finally manifests his glory, it shines all the more brilliantly. Consider the lengthy span between each of God's most outstanding wonders. From creation to the flood, to the Exodus, to the return from exile, to the resurrection of Christ, and then to the future coming of Christ. There's a long time between each of those 6 mighty events. It's those prolonged lapses between his major activities that put the flair into the way God invades and redirects human history. The deafening silence of the thousands of years between each mighty intervention has rumbled throughout history in drum rolls of suspenseful anticipation. The waiting seasons actually give God the room he needs to write the story. Those who demand resolution too hastily can forfeit the grandeur of what God was intending to write. By taking things into our own hands prematurely, we can undermine the basis upon which God was planning to write your last great chapter. For since the beginning of the world, men have not heard, nor perceived by the ear, nor has the eye seen any God besides you, who acts for the one who waits for him. And that comes from Isaiah 64:4. This was written by some guy named Bob Sorge. I don't know who he is. But I thought it was really good. And I look back on the last year, and I look at our Third Step team. Now, next week we'll celebrate God's choice. But today we want to tell you some stuff that's going on with Third Step. About a year ago, it seemed like Third Step kind of hit a wall. And we've been open about that and honest and called you all to fasting and prayer. And we wondered, what is God doing? And I watched your team come together. And you know what? Those were moments when we could have gone, let's just get in a big fight. We're irritated with each other. We're frustrated with what is not happening. It's a little disappointing. We don't know what God is doing. And you guys Pastor Rand called your team to fasting and prayer, and we came to a meeting. I remember coming to that meeting and going, I'm not the leader of this group, but I really hope they don't shut this down. I went a little nervous, and I'm sure that in some ways you were a little disappointed that God didn't give you more. You were hoping for more, but what God gave you was don't quit. And that was what resonated across the room that night as we had dinner together, was don't quit. And we didn't understand. But God just kept saying to us, don't quit on people who need Jesus. Don't quit on the addicts because they are worth it. There's hope for them. We love them and we want to come together. And that Satan could have used that moment to divide your team. Because we're human, right? We get annoyed with each other. There's things about each other that annoy us. And yet your team came together and said, we're going to do what God has called us. We don't really understand what he's up to, but we're going to just keep fasting and praying. We've been fasting and praying for months. And yet we feel like God has answered some of those prayers this week. And are you going to come? Pastor Ann is going to come and give us a really exciting update on what God is starting to do in Third Step Ministry. And so I just want to say to Pastor Ray and her team, we're so proud of you that you came together and you listened to God even when what he was saying wasn't exactly what you wanted to hear all the time. So she's going to share what God is doing.
Well, we're super excited about an opportunity that came up this Wednesday. Let me lay a little bit of background for you. So when Brett was here, do you remember Brett? Heinzman, I always get his last name wrong. He encouraged us to continue fasting for the ministry, and so we started doing that again. And in our waiting, just saying, Lord, show us where we need to go, because we had a meeting, I think it was in April. We got together with another pastor who works with addicts, wanted to get everybody who had Christian addiction ministries together in Beaver Falls, and we went. And what I came out of that meeting with was, you need to be where they are. Because, we're not on a bus line here. We're not downtown anywhere where there's a lot of foot traffic going by. We're not super easy to get to on a Wednesday night. And so I thought, that's it. We need to be where they are. So as many of us maybe do, I was like, okay, well, let's just throw things at the wall and see what sticks. And maybe God will bless this, because sometimes waiting, all the time, waiting is hard. And so we said, and it's a good thing, and we made some good relationships in doing lunch in the park in Beaver Falls this summer. Every Monday we had lunch in the park with the hopes of meeting people who were doing outpatient rehab at ABC Associates on Main Street in Beaver Falls. I think we met 4 people who were in the outpatient rehab. We fed over 20 people, I think, every week. So that kind of tells you that probably we weren't really going to where they were. We met some homeless folks. We met lots of fun, neat people in Beaver Falls. But it became pretty clear that that wasn't where we were going to meet people to be able to minister to them and have them come to Third Step. So we kept praying, and long story, even longer, Emily had felt called to do some ministry at the jail, and I had long wanted to do that, but always felt like, oh, it'll never happen. It's so hard to get in there. How, could we do that? People tell me stories about how hard it is to get into the jail, unless you commit a crime. So we went on Wednesday and had a meeting with the warden, and we just went totally open and said, we want to help meet needs. What need do you have in the jail? We want to try to minister. As chaplains, 2 pastors going in, we thought we could do something. If they wanted to do a Bible study, we wanted to think a little more outside the box than that, but we were open. And the warden was talking a lot. He was talking and said something about recovery ministry, just recovery, and that I think the statistic he shared was 80% of the inmates in Beaver County Jail have some sort of addiction problem, drug or alcohol addiction problem. And so then I jumped in and said, well, we do this Third Step recovery ministry on Wednesday nights, and he said, well, we have an opening on Mondays now because this guy that Marv and I are familiar with, who have been doing a program at the jail, has just moved, and these Monday nights are now open. Would you like to bring that recovery ministry to the jail every Monday? And we were like, yes, we would love to do that. Although we have our home group is every second and fourth Monday, so and Emily comes to our home groups, and we were like, how about every first and third and fifth Monday? So we're super excited. We're still going to meet here on Wednesdays because our goal is to reach people while they are incarcerated, and then when they get out, have them have a place to come to where they will feel welcomed and encouraged and be offered hope in Jesus' name. So what an answer to prayer. And God's timing is so perfect, because if we had done this 2 months ago or 3 months ago, LeVar, who's the guy who was doing the Monday night program, was still in there, and there wouldn't have been the opening for us to take third step in. So his timing is perfect. Be encouraged, Pastor Collene. His timing is perfect for the worship director. We can just put our trust in God, but please be praying for us as we go forward and figure out all the logistics of it. But really excited about this opportunity.
Isn't it great to hear of some exciting things that are happening in the church? It just feels like God is like bringing us out of that season of kind of waiting on Him and moving forward. We have some exciting things happening. Next week we'll celebrate God's Choice, as I said, so we hear some things that are happening with the God's Choice ministry. But do you feel like there's a little bit of excitement about what God is doing and moving us forward? And so it was interesting that as we spoke on Monday night with leadership team, Pastor Rayanne said something that clicked with me for this week's sermon. She said, when we get excited about what God is doing and God is moving us forward and God has exciting things ahead for us, what does Satan love to do?
He likes to kill and destroy.
He likes to, that is exactly right, to kill and destroy. And the best way he does that is by what?
Discouraging.
Discouraging and making people have struggles in relationships.
Why?
That's because that's Satan's biggest trick. It's the oldest trick in the world. If he can get relationships to be in friction, can he pull apart all of God's Choice, all of Third Step, all of Sunday ministries, right? The worship team, that's what God could, that's what, not God, God would not do that. That's what Satan wants to do. Because it's the easiest way, right, it's the easiest way for him to bring down the church.
But we're not going to let him.
That will, exactly right, thank you. I mean, how many times have you heard about the church that split over a stupid argument between two people in the church? It started as two people, right? And so today I'm going to tell us about Esau and Jacob, and it's a cautionary tale. I want us to just journey through their story. It spans multiple chapters in the book of Genesis. So I'm going to I'll share some scripture, I'll tell you part of the story, but just so that you understand what's happening. So we've started in the book of Genesis, and the last couple of weeks we've been talking about Abraham. Abraham married a woman named Sarah. Sarah and Abraham had a son named who? Isaac. Okay, Isaac marries a woman named Rebecca, and they have a child, or they actually prayed to the Lord, let us have children. Okay, so here's where we're going to pick up the story in Genesis 25, starting with verses 21 through 23. Okay, Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was childless. The Lord answered his prayer, and his wife Rebecca became pregnant. I pointed this out last week, that Isaac, instead of doing what his dad did and his mother did, which was, we'll solve this problem of waiting by having Abraham have a baby with another woman. Right? It seems like a great plan. What could possibly happen from that story? Well, Isaac decides to go a different route, and he says, well, I think I'll pray.
Good choice.
It seems like a prayer. Now, that doesn't mean that we can come to God and rub his head like a genie and we'll get our 3 wishes. Okay? But in this case, the Lord answered his prayer, and Rebecca becomes pregnant. She becomes pregnant with twins. I know some of us would be very happy by that, and some of us would panic. The babies jostled within her, and she said, "Why is this happening to me?" So she went to inquire of the Lord. The Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger." And so it goes on to tell us about how Esau and Jacob are born, and they are basically born into conflict. It describes even their birth shows conflict. And if you know your Old Testament history, if you follow this all the way through Genesis, you know that out of Jacob, the younger son, comes the 12 tribes of Israel. Okay? So the boys are, how many of us have siblings? Some of you might have more than one child. And you know that the minute you have more than one child, sometimes there's conflict. Just sometimes. Now, in our house, my kids are best friends. And actually, my kids are good friends. No, not during soccer season. Alexa's not a fan of Max during soccer. He's mean. So there are, even yesterday, I think she was stomping around the house mad at Max or something. We know that there's conflict in families. And so there was conflict between these two brothers. We pick up the story in Genesis 25, starting in verse 27. The boys grew up, and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country, while Jacob was content to stay at home among the tents. Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Once, when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau came in from the open country famished. He said to Jacob, "Quick, let me have some of that red stew. I'm famished." This is also why he is called Edom. Jacob replied, "First sell me your birthright." "Look, I am about to die," Esau said. "What good is the birthright to me?" But Jacob said, "Swear to me first." So he swore an oath to him, selling his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau some bread and some lentil stew. He ate and drank, and then got up and left. So Esau despised his birthright. So let me explain what's happening here. We've talked about this before, but what in the world is a birthright? Okay, a birthright is something that is given to the oldest son. In the Old Testament, the oldest son always got the first and the best. They were kind of the prized person. So in our family, Danny would be, would trump Becky and I every time. And so in this case, Esau happened to be born very shortly before Jacob. And so therefore, he becomes the oldest child with the right to the birthright. And this is how this worked. The oldest son would inherit the land of his father, his possessions, the best of everything, and they received a double portion. So in our family, my parents' estate, which I'm sure will be very large, we're hanging on in anticipation of what our inheritance will be. But instead of dividing the estate in 3 parts, they would divide it in 4 and give 2 of them to Danny. And Becky and I now, and obviously we actually wouldn't get it because I don't think girls got them at all, but let's just say that's how it would work. So the oldest son always got double what the others got. The oldest son is also given responsibility of passing records of history, tradition, and established values to the next generation. So Danny would be in charge of passing down all of my mother's crazy traditions down to all the next children. Actually, she has very nice traditions. I was saying the other day that my parents probably passed down more traditions to our kids than we have. We're not very, if my kids are going to grow up and when they get older, they're going to think back and go, all the fun stuff we ever did were with grandma and grandma. So maybe my tip to new couples is create your own traditions so that it's not just grandma and grandpa. But they were in charge of doing that. the oldest would also receive not only the birthright, which was the material side of things, but they would also receive a spiritual blessing from their father. And so here is Jacob and Esau. Esau is entitled to the birthright. If you were an oldest son, would you ever give that up? Probably not. Probably not. But here comes Esau, and he's hungry. And so Jacob, somehow, he ends up selling his birthright for a casserole. Listen, if I've had, there are things that I have inherited. I suppose I've inherited money one time, many years ago. But my grandparents, I inherited a few things from my grandparents. And those have become very precious, treasured things to me. I inherited a set of dishes and a china cabinet from my grandmother. And I also inherited some teddy bears, antique teddy bears, that my grandparents had in their Christmas tree every year for 64 years. And when I turned 13, my grandmother told me that I would be getting those teddy bears. And I'm pretty sure that some other people might have taken them from me. But fortunately, she gave them to me first. And now, I wouldn't give them up for a casserole. Like, if my house burns down, after the kids and Dirk, the thing I'm rescuing is those teddy bears. They are prized possessions, so you wouldn't be flippant about this. And yet it seems a little impulsive. But here we have two brothers that are just in constant conflict. And these decisions that Jacob and Esau would have end up having huge consequences. If you were to read the entirety of the Old Testament, you would see that the descendants of these two families have problems for generations. Hebrews 12:14-17 says this about Esau. Make every effort to live in peace with everyone and to be holy. Without holiness, no one will see the Lord. That's what Third Step has done. That's what many groups in this church have done, is they've made an effort to live at peace with each other and help people see Jesus in that. See to it that no one falls short of the grace of God, and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many. See that no one is sexually immoral or as godless like Esau, who for a single meal sold his inheritance rights as the oldest son. Afterward, as you know, when he wanted to inherit this blessing, which we'll get to in a minute, he was rejected. Even though he sought the blessing with tears, he could not change what he had done. The rest of this story takes many twists and turns, and I don't have time to tell you all of Esau and Jacob's story. But when Isaac becomes old, Isaac their father, he becomes old and blind. And he calls for Esau so that he might give him the blessing. The blessing is the spiritual gift that he gives to Esau as his oldest son. And he calls for his servant to go find Esau so that he might give the blessing to Esau. And do you know what happens? Rebekah, the mother, hears the request and decides to devise a plan to make sure that Jacob receives the blessing instead of Esau. And so here's what she has him do. She calls for Jacob, and she has him bring her 2 goats so that she might prepare Isaac's favorite meal for him. You might think, ew, who wants to eat goat? So she prepares Isaac's favorite meal for him, and then to further the deceit, she takes the skin from the goat and puts it on Jacob's necks and arms so that he will feel hairy like Esau. Esau is described in the Bible as hairy. So then Jacob goes before his father. You find this in chapter 27 of the book of Genesis. And he goes before his father, and his father is not quite buying it. If you read the story, Isaac's like, is this really Esau? Is this really you, Esau? And Jacob lies. And here's the blessing that Isaac ends up giving Jacob instead of Esau. Oh, the smell of my son.
Ooh.
The goat. It's like the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you heaven's dew and earth's richness, an abundance of grain and new wine. May nations serve you and peoples bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may the sons of your mother bow down to you. May those who curse you be cursed, and those who bless you be blessed. And if you know, again, the rest of the story, Jacob's family becomes the descendants of Abraham, become the nation of Israel. They are, blessed in many ways. Later on, of course, Esau comes in and realizes what has happened, begs his father for a blessing, which he does give him, but it's not the same one that Jacob gets. The picture of conflict is everywhere in this story. Conflicting loyalties, conflicting ideas, conflicting desires, conflicting loves. The first signs of conflict appear in the womb. Jacob and Esau are in conflict before they're even born. So here are the relationships that we see that are strained in this story. Of course, Jacob and Esau, but we see a conflict between Jacob and his father, a conflict between Esau and Rebekah, because they decide to have favorite children. This is never really a good idea. There's moments when you might want to kill one or the other, but you shouldn't have favorites. There's a problem with Isaac and Rebekah in their marriage. Rebekah goes to great lengths to deceive her husband. And then lastly, you might say this isn't really a relationship problem, but Jacob and Rebekah. Rebekah, the mother, and her son, the favored son, Jacob, there's a conflict there too. You might say, well, that seems like a great relationship. Well, it's based on deceit. That's not a healthy situation either. In this story, we find favoritism, deceit, jealousy, lying, anger, and unforgiveness. Ever had a problem like that in a relationship? How many of us have deceived somebody else? Lied? Been jealous? Been angry? Unwilling to forgive? We could probably all point to something in our lives where we were like this. Jacob ends up spending much of his life on the run from Esau, because here's the rest of the story. So Esau's pretty mad. Wouldn't you be mad? Some of you have probably had estate and inheritance fights in your family, where people got mad and it caused problems forever. And so Esau decides I'm going to kill my brother. He devises a plan to kill his brother. Heard this story before? Maybe like the third sermon I preached on the book of Genesis on Cain and Abel. So Esau decides he's going to kill his brother. So Rebekah helps Jacob run away to be with his uncle Laban. And here's Jacob the deceiver. Ends up being deceived. And if you know that story, that's a whole nother sermon I could have preached. Laban, he wants to marry Laban's daughter Rachel because she's beautiful. So he decides he's going to make Jacob take Leah as his wife without knowing it after 7 years of labor. And then he could have Rachel for 7 more years of labor. I'm not sure that Jim and Dirk would have wanted Becky and I that much. Jim, you're lucky I was married. But there's conflict, right? And then there's a big conflict between Laban and Jacob, so he ends up running away and decides he's going to go back to his brother. That's pretty risky. There's a big problem, and the problem, it has a happy ending, but the generations still have conflict. The consequences are for a very, very long time. You still see it in the Middle East today. Jacob finally decides he's going to send gifts to his brother, going to beg his brother forgiveness, and in Genesis 33:4, this is what happens. Of course, this is the Cliff Notes. Esau ran to meet Jacob and embraced him. He threw his arms around his neck and kissed him, and they wept. Somehow, in the midst of it all, Esau is gracious and forgiveness, and offering forgiveness to his brother when it wasn't really deserved. But the consequences still can't be changed. Do we want to be like Jacob and Esau? In constant conflict with other people? Or do we want to spend our lives in peace with others? I know that sometimes we cannot fix some relationships in our lives, and I understand that, but we can try to make them peaceful. We are called as the church to work together, to love each other, to encourage each other, to get along. I love when I just walk around this church on a Sunday or on a Monday or on a Wednesday. I see groups of people that shouldn't be able to work together, and there they are doing the work of God. You know, I come in here on Sunday morning and I see our praise team that's been through a rough year. They're stuck with me as their leader right now. And they come in every week and they work their tails off and they love each other. Now, there's moments of irritation. But they have pulled together and loved each other through this year. And I hope if you see one of them this week that you'll say thank you. Because they could have allowed Satan to get in the middle of this and said, I've just had it with all of you. And they have come together. I love when I come on a Wednesday night and I see Third Step group working together. God's choice is like a well-oiled machine. I'll never forget the moment I realized that we had something really special going on. It was one of the first months of God's choice. I just was, I don't do anything. I just walk in and say thanks for what you're doing, right? I come in one week and I walk into the children's classroom back there, and sitting at the little kids' table in little kids' chairs is grown men like Dave Smith, and I could name a whole bunch of people, sitting there with little kid scissors, cutting out the craft. And I remember thinking, that's what God wants us to do. That's what God has for us. And wouldn't it be a shame if we allowed Satan, in the moment when God is marching us forward, to divide us by silliness? And so my challenge to all of us today is to continue doing what you've been doing. Continue to love each other. Continue to encourage each other. If you see someone that's been working really hard, say thank you. Find ways to help. This is an exciting time in our church. If you're not involved, we can find a place for you. Be involved in one of these teams because great things are coming from them. Psalm 133:1 says, how good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity. I'm so glad that when I'm out and about in the community that I don't hear, oh, you're that church that fought about that. Do you know what I hear when I'm in the community? I hear, oh, you're the church with the buses in the parking lot on Monday. You're the church that has that recovery ministry. Ephesians 4:2-6 says, be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to one hope when you were called. One Lord, one faith, one baptism. One God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in